Hello art beaters, Becky here with artbeats.com, and I've got a brand new video for you today. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do the two-seed bead backstitch, which is a really basic bead embroidery technique. And I'll be showing you how to do this around a beautiful hand-painted focal bead. This is really a foundational technique for bead embroidery, and there's lots you can do with it. So it's a really great technique to start out with if you're just getting into bead embroidery. So I hope you enjoy and learn something today. So I'm going to be showing you how to do the two-seed bead backstitch today. It's a really basic bead embroidery technique that's really effective. So here's an example of bead embroidery around one of our hand-painted focals. I picked this really pretty spring bird and I did 3 rows of two-seed bead backstitch around this piece, actually. One with 8/0 Toho round seed beads and then 2 rows with 4mm check glass fire polished beads. And there's more techniques than just two-seed bead backstitch that you can use in bead embroidery. And we have got a great guide to bead embroidery on our website, on our blog. I've got a link to that in the video description if you want to dive more into bead embroidery and get more kind of step-by-step photo tutorials and kind of, you know, the basics for how to get started. That's all there for you. So two-seed bead backstitch is a basic stitch, and then a brick stitch edge is another basic stitch for completing your bead embroidered piece. And then I actually added a picot edge to the brick stitch edge of this piece. So you can get really intricate and creative with it, but that foundation technique is going to be the two-seed bead backstitch. So what I have done is I have actually taken this is one of our new hand-painted focal beads. I love that pink background and those white blossoms, so beautiful. I've actually glued this to my beading foundation. So what you're going to need to get started with bead embroidery is a nice beading foundation like this option from the Beadsmith. This is a 4.25 inch by 5.5 inch sheet of beading foundation, and it comes in different sizes. You can buy it individually or in a pack of 4, and it comes in white and black. So depending on the colors in your design, you might want a black piece of beading foundation versus a white. I've chosen a white because I've got some lighter bead colors. So I've just glued it down here. I would recommend using 5-minute epoxy adhesive for gluing. It's really strong. It'll dry really fast. You still want it to cure for 24 hours, but it will dry faster. It'll dry in about 5 minutes, as the name implies. And then you just want to glue it. I would glue it into the center of your bead backing so you have room to bead embroider around. This is kind of the perfect size for a focal like this. And you can see that it's stiffer than felt, so it's a nice solid foundation for your bead embroidery. You're also going to want to use some needles. I've got tulip embroidery needles here, number 10, that's the size. So we'll be using those to do our bead embroidery today. And then you're also going to need some thread. I like to match my thread to the color of the piece that I'm doing, but I will choose something that's going to contrast a little bit more with my bead mat and my beading foundation so you guys can see what I'm doing. So I will use this KO thread, this nice blue color. That's also a nice kind of sky blue spring color. For the beads that I'm using today, I have got 8/0 Toho round seed beads in this lovely kind of turquoise blue color. I thought that would look really nice with that pink background. And I've got some 4mm fire polished beads as well if we want to create more than 1 row of the two-seed bead backstitch. And I don't know if we'll get into brick stitch edge today. We might have to make this a series of videos on bead embroidery, which I think you guys might enjoy. But if I were to do the edge like in this piece, I would use this color to kind of bring out those gold accents in my focal bead. So that's kind of the color ideas that I have. So let's get started with the two-seed bead backstitch, and it's actually a fairly simple technique. So I'm just going to cut a length of thread. My go-to length of thread is about an arm's span length. And this technique is, it's kind of easy to knot your thread on the back of your beading foundation and add more because you do have that back side to work with. You can kind of knot your thread in place there and then trim it and then just easily knot a new piece of thread and add it in. So if you like working with shorter lengths of thread, that's totally okay. And I'm going to thread, I'm going to add my thread to my needle. Yeah, I think a series on bead embroidery is a great idea because I don't think we'll have, I mean, we could sit here for hours and just bead embroider a whole piece, but, you know, there's other things that need to be done in the day. So I think a video series would be really great. All right, I've got my needle threaded, and what I'm going to do at the end of my thread is I am just going to make a knot. And this is going to be going to the back of my piece. And I typically do like a double knot here. One knot I'm sure is fine, but I like to double knot it just so I know that that knot won't poke through my beading foundation. And the Beadsmith beading foundation is kind of stiff enough that that typically doesn't happen, but you know, safe than sorry, better safe than sorry. There we go. That's a nice knot that won't break through. So what I'm going to do first, I've got my piece here. I'm going to bring my needle. I'm going to start like right on the bottom edge of this. And you're going to want to bring your needle close to the edge of your bead. And because you have that knot at the end of your thread, you can just pull this through all the way up to the knot. Good morning, Dee. All right, so now we're kind of ready to start the Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch. So what you're going to do first, you're going to pick up 2 seed beads, as the name implies. And I'm going to pull them all the way down to the edge of my piece. Ooh, I'm already loving those colors together. Yes. And then you're going to bring the needle back down, and you're going to want to stay close to the edge of that bead, and you're also going to want to stay close to where the beads will lie. So you don't want to like poke all the way down here. That would be bad and a lot of thread would show. So you want to close to the edge and close to where the beads will lay space-wise. Width-wise, I guess you would say. And then bring that back down. Now these look kind of wonky right now, but what you're gonna do next will help them get whipped into shape. So now you're going to bring your needle back up through the bead backing close to that first bead you added, close to where you originally pierced your beading foundation. And then bring that back up. And then you're gonna go back through the 2 seed beads. And pull. So you've got your first 2 seed beads on, woohoo! So basically you kind of just keep going with that. Adding the first seed beads is a little different from adding the rest. So what you're going to do next to keep adding, you're going to add 2 seed beads to the thread. Slide them all the way down there. Pierce your beading foundation close to the edge of the bead and also close to where the beads lay on the thread. And this is the first time I'm using these Tulip bead embroidery needles, and they work really nice. They're nice and sturdy, stiff. They're a little bit stiffer than regular beading needles, and shorter, which is a little easier to manipulate through that beading foundation. So really loving the Tulip bead embroidery needles. All right, so I've got my 2 extra seed beads in place. Now what you're gonna do is you want to bring your needle back through the top of the beading foundation, close to the 3 seed beads back. So you've just added 2. You want to go 3 seed beads back and bring it up through there. And also be sure when you're bringing your thread back, you don't want to split that thread that's running through all of your seed beads, because that could kind of make the shape a little weird. So your 3 seed beads back, and then you're going to bring your needle through all 3 of those seed beads. There you go. And you just keep doing that. So going back, back 1 extra seed bead than the one you've just added will keep the shape a little bit nicer, versus you could just go through the new 2 seed beads that you've added, but then I think that the beads would be a little more disjointed from each other because they would look like individual stitches more. Going back 3 seed beads makes the stitching a little more smooth and fluid. So you just keep going with that. So I've added 2 seed beads, piercing my bead backing close to the beads I've just added and close to the edge of my focal bead. And then I'm gonna come up through the beading foundation 3 seed beads back, or as close to that as I can get it, making sure not to pierce the thread that's running through all of my seed beads. And then going through the last 3 seed beads. Oops. There, it's looking so pretty. I love that. So this works up actually pretty fast. I know a lot of people are intimidated by bead embroidery because it looks so intricate and very time consuming, but actually when you compare it to something like brick stitch or peyote stitch, I feel it goes relatively quickly. Typically the beads you're using are going to be bigger than the beads you use for something like peyote stitch or brick stitch. When I'm peyote stitching or brick stitching, I'm using small little 11/0 cylinders. And for something like this, I've been using 8/0 seed beads, 4mm fire polished. So because you're using bigger beads and because you're kind of adding multiple beads at once, I feel it goes quicker than something like that. And with this technique, you can make any shape really. I'm just following the shape, the outline of my focal bead. If you had a round focal, you could make these beads shape around the round focal. You could do a free form kind of thing where you make like mandala patterns. This is a really great technique for really getting creative with your beadwork. So you can see how quickly that all lines up. So again, I'm just adding 2 seed beads, and I like to slide them down before I pierce my thread so I know like where these seed beads are going to lay, and that kind of informs me where I should pierce my beading foundation. Coming back down through the beading foundation. Coming back up, and sometimes I'm kind of a bad I'll find myself trying to like guesstimate where I should pierce the back of my beading foundation, and I'll end up poking the back of my focal bead. That happens. It happens in cross stitch too, where you don't pierce where you think you're supposed to be. Coming back through those last 3 seed beads. I'm about to lose my needle on my thread there. There we go. Does it matter where you start? I don't don't think so, because you can just come back around and connect it all. I think starting on a corner would be a little trickier, but I think starting on any of these edges would work. I'd like to freeform patterns, but I don't know how to draw. Oh, you know what, Becky? I bet you could like take a look at patterns online, like mandala patterns, and maybe like sketch something based off of those. I think that would work for sure. Or you could find, what you could do is you could find like a pretty patterned fabric and you could glue that on top of your bead backing and then like use the patterns in the fabric to like do your freeform beading. I think that would be really pretty. So there's definitely ways around it if you feel like you can't draw. There's things to help you out there. Oh, thank you, Bernadette. Yeah, so what I'm doing right now is called the Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch, and it is just a really simple bead embroidery technique. So you can see that I'm coming to my first corner. So I'm just going to make sure that when I go back down through my beading foundation, that it's pretty close to that corner. So this is where you're going to start to see like you can really manipulate the shape here. Yeah, so this is a really simple bead embroidery technique that you can use in a lot of different ways. It makes a great frame for something like a hand-painted focal like this. You could use it freeform to make all kinds of different shapes and designs. You could use it around a round cabochon. So pretty. Now I'm going 3 seed beads back. There we go. So I've brought my needle up 3 seed beads back. And I'm going to go through those 3 seed beads. There we go. So now I'm going to add 2 more seed beads. Whoops, my needle came off my thread. So my seed beads just fell off the needle. There was no thread to go onto. Let's see if we can get that back on there. There we go, easy. These embroidery needles are pretty easy to thread as well. Okay, so we've come to our corner, so you can kind of see. I'm just gonna like pull my thread up this way and pierce my beading foundation close to that corner to kind of get the shape in place for this corner. It's really easy to manipulate where those beads go with this stitch. Oh, Karen, I just finished one of the pendants. I learned all the stitches from you. I'll send you a picture. That is so cool, Karen. Yeah, we'd love to see a picture of something that you've just made. And in fact, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, we have a private Facebook group for serious art beaders where customers like you, art beaders, we all share our pictures of our jewelry designs. We share works in progress. It's a really great group. There we go. All right, so I've pierced my beading foundation 3 seed beads back. And I'm going to go through the last 3 seed beads added. So you're adding 2 seed beads every time, but when you bring the thread back through, you're going through 3 seed beads. So just keep that in mind. So you can see I've already rounded that corner, and I'm ready to add 2 more seed beads. And this is a really great color with this pink focal bead. Oh, I'm just loving that contrast. So pretty. how did I attach the cabochon to my beading foundation? I glued it. I would recommend using 5-minute epoxy adhesive. That's a really great strong one that it dries in 5 minutes. You're going to want to let it cure for 24 hours at least, but it will dry really fast. So that's a good glue to use for something like this. Now, I will say these beads, these focal beads do have stringing holes. So I thought for this one, I was like, oh, maybe I could just like sew it in place. But I did end up gluing it because when you sew it in place, these edges aren't as flush with the bead backing. So then like your seed beads in your first row might like tuck under the bead. So I know it's kind of scary to glue these really beautiful like artisan pieces, but I really do recommend it for bead embroidery. It will make your piece look better in the long run. Oh, I'm loving this. Oh, thank you, Annette. I'm thinking it's looking pretty gorgeous too. So I've added 2, going back down through the beading foundation, close to my focal bead and close to where the seed beads lay. What kind of thread do you use? I am using for this piece a KO beading thread. You're going to want to use a color that's similar to all your beads. I did want to use a darker thread here to contrast with the bead backing that I'm using. You can use KO thread, 1G thread. I would recommend if you're going to be adding crystals into your design like this one, use Fireline. That is a really strong thread that the crystals aren't going to cut through. So Fireline is a good one if you plan on using crystals in your bead embroidery. Oops. My needle keeps coming off of the thread. I'm too hasty with my thread pulling, I guess. But it's looking really great. So far, this is looking doable. Good, yeah. I know a lot of people get intimidated by bead embroidery because it does. The finished pieces look so intricate and time-consuming, but you know, it actually goes by pretty fast. It's pretty easy. I say this is one, especially this stitch, the Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch. This is something you could do while watching TV for sure. That's what I did when I was working on this piece. Gotta love beading and TV watching all at the same time. How did you do the bail? That's what I'm doing now. So it's just a beaded bail that I added to the top of my piece. We do have a step-by-step photo instruction for that in our guide to bead embroidery, which I linked in the video description. We have a blog post with all of the basics and all of the in-depth tutorials that we have for bead embroidery. I've linked it. You can find that there, but it's super easy. So once you've done all your rows of Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch, which is what I'm doing now, you can do as many rows as you want. You can do 1, 2, 3. I did a row of A.SeedBead, Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch, and then a row of 4mm fire polished beads in one color, and then a third row of 4mm fire polished beads in another color. So once you've added all of your rows of Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch that you want, you're going to trim your bead backing to size. And this is why I'm thinking we should have a whole video series on bead embroidery. So maybe for the next video, I'll show you how to do the brick stitch edge. So you'll trim your bead backing close to your last row of Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch. Then you glue a piece of fabric to the back of your bead backing. And it will be the same shape. You can cut it to the same shape as your bead backing. And then you add that brick stitch edge to finish the edges in a really neat and tidy way. And then I added a picot edge. But at the top here, I didn't add the picot edge here. I added my seed bead bail loop to the top. So I brought my seed beads out of that center brick stitch edge bead, added 8 or 9 seed beads, and then came back down through the same seed bead went up through the next seed bead, added 8 or 9 seed beads, came back down through the same seed beads to create these little beaded loops that make the bail. So we do have instructions for that in our guide to bead embroidery. We can do a video of that in the future. Please let me know if you think this would be a good, I think this would be a great series to just keep teaching you guys about bead embroidery and teach myself too. I haven't done a whole lot of bead embroidery, so it's nice to kind of revisit these techniques, get better at them, do them more, and they're really inspiring. I think I'm in trouble now because now I have an idea for bead embroidery. So I have this personal project going on. I'm making peyote stitch tapestries of the wives of King Henry VIII. And I'm on the 5th wife, I believe. I'm so close to being done. But after I finished this, I was like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be so cool if I like glued those peyote stitch tapestries to beading foundation and then made a 2-seed-bead backstitch bead embroidery frame around each one. And I think it would be so beautiful, but I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just gonna add even more work to my vision, but I think I have to do it. I think it'd be so beautiful. So yeah, bead embroidery has definitely inspired some of my personal projects. I think that would be just a beautiful way to showcase those peyote stitch tapestries even more and combine some techniques too. So yeah, so this bead embroidery does go pretty fast for how intricate it looks. And like I said, you can make, you know, 1 row of 2-seed-bead backstitch, 2 rows, 3 rows. Yeah, these tulip needles are really nice to work with. Look at that, it's coming along. Yeah, so really simple technique, the 2-seed-bead backstitch. You'll just keep going, and I showed you how to kind of manipulate the shape, so it's really easy to get the shape that you want. So I will go all the way around this focal and then come back. I'll probably bring my thread through maybe one more time to get the beads lined up even more, and then I'd like to do at least 1 more row of 2-seed-bead backstitch. I think with these, oh, that would be so beautiful because these purple beads have a little hint of pink to them as well. That would be really beautiful. Even these remind me of like morning dew in spring. They just look like little droplets of nectar or water. Oh, those look really pretty too. So I might have to do 3 rows. 1 row of these fire polished beads and then another row of these fire polished beads. And it's just the same technique that I'm showing you here. Just pick up 2 beads, stitch them in place, then go back through the last 3 seed beads. So let's make this a video series. The next video that we do for bead embroidery, I will show you how to do that brick stitch edge to complete and kind of give your piece a finished look. And you know what, I've messed up here because I thought I already stitched those 2 seed beads down. I only just added them. So I'm just gonna go back through those beads and make sure these ones are stitched in place. And like I said before, I've got links to everything in the video description, links to A-dot seed beads, 4mm fire polished beads if you want to choose your own colors, links to bead backing, or focal beads. Yeah, I'd love a series on bead embroidery. I have a lot of round and oval cabs and I'd love to learn different ways. Yeah, I think this would be a great series. So maybe that can be our homework, is to finish our 2-seed-bead backstitch rows, and then when we come back, we will do the brick stitch edge, which will be really fun. I'm giving you all homework. Work on your 2-seed-bead backstitch. But it's fun homework if you ask me. Does the KO thread stretch? You know, it doesn't really stretch all that much. I usually like to do a little bit of stretch on my thread when I unspool it, but this one I find when I unspool it, it doesn't really kink too badly. But I do, when I'm working with any type of thread, I do kind of just give it a nice little stretch before using it, because it does make the thread feel smoother and gets any like bends or kinks out. But it doesn't, I don't find when I'm working with it that it stretches too much to like misshape the stitch or the weave that I'm doing. So pretty. Okay, so that's the Two-Seed-Bead Backstitch. I'm going to keep going with this, maybe add some rows. And then the next video that we do on bead embroidery will be the brick stitch edge. I think that'll be really fun. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope this helps you with your bead embroidery endeavors. If you liked this video, please make sure to leave a like and a comment. I will be making this a video series, so keep your eye out on the next bead embroidery video. Make sure to subscribe so that you know when that video is out, and so you know when other videos like this one are out. Thank you so much again, and I will see you next time. Bye!